Okay, members, I'll open the meeting properly. So anyway, welcome members and members of the general public. I'll just go through a bit of housekeeping first. If you hear the fire alarm, it will be for real. Please leave by the double doors, go out the way you've come in, and please congregate on the back car park. If any of you don't want to be recorded, please let one of the committee clerks know, and we'll try and not get you recorded. Okay, so I'll move on to the agenda properly. So item 1, apologies.
Yes,
Lucy.
Chair. We've received apologies from Councillors Elliott, Fitzherbert, Buttle and Slack. Sitting as substitute is Councillor Finesse and Councillor Froggatt.
Thank you very much. So item 2 is approval of the minutes of the previous meeting. I'll move them.
Second, Chair.
All those in favour, please shout. That's been carried unanimously. Item 3, interests. Any members declaring interest in anything from the business tonight? No? In which case then we'll move straight into applications. The first application I've got is application 5.1, which is the full application for Bradley Hall. I'm going to take all the speakers under this. So people that are down, I will take you all on the first part, because the second bit is a listed building consent and it runs concurrent from if it goes through. So, and it'll give you a better way of being to articulate what you're trying to say. So anyway, there is a little bit of late reps on this, so members, if you'd like to read the late reps, and then I'll ask the speakers to come up and we'll get underway. Is everybody happy? Yep. And then the first on my list is Mr. Paul Staley, the applicant. You have 5 minutes to speak, and I'll indicate when you have 30 seconds left.
I'd firstly like to reassure everyone that Bradley Hall will not become a large holiday let. This is my family home with Jenny and our 7 children. The swimming pool will be inside the house, so no noise will be heard whilst in use. The drainage for the pool will be through the modern Clydechester system and will be approved by building regulations. The hot tubs on site are restricted to use after 10:30 p.m. to prevent noise travel. Our home is directly attached to the holiday lets. We also don't want any noise after this time. Our children need a good night's sleep, and we wouldn't let our guests affect this. They are contacted immediately if noise is made after this time. After the bat survey, all the comments made by the Derbyshire Wildlife Trust are fine and acceptable, and I agree to the nesting brick details. The detailed comments from the Design and Conservation Officer are all agreeable, as are all the conditions attached to them. Lengthy dialogue was carried out between ourselves as to agree the most suitable plans for the works. I could read these out to explain in detail, but they are all itemised in the report and I don't have enough allocated time. With regards to the objections received, some of these have been very upsetting, as there has been a lot of misinformation about our plans. The rumours almost forced us out of the village, and if it wasn't for the kind support of a few long-standing residents, we would have left. The majority of the comments are concerned that the property is going to be a holiday let. Referencing the representations received, the second bullet point in the report states if there was any degree of certainty that the development was for personal use, there would be fewer concerns. To me, this shows how misinformation has spread and caused unnecessary alarm. Again, I want to reassure everyone this development is for my family home, all 9 of us. One of my daughters attends Bradley Primary School and another is enrolled for September. Myself, my architect and the Planning Authority have worked hard to create a scheme that is sympathetic to the listed building. The Planning Officer's appraisal relating to the material planning issues is an excellent analysis and I agree with it entirely and will make sure everything is abided to. I hope this application is agreed so my family can enjoy the pool for years to come. Thank you.
Very succinct, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next on my list is Mr. Simon Whitehead, a local resident, to speak against the application. You have 3 minutes and I'll indicate when you have 30 seconds left. Can you turn your microphone on? That's it?
Sorry. I've been a developer for nearly 40 years now, and on several occasions I've had to meet planners and building control to discuss certain plans that you guys put forward. Every time you guys put an application in, I've agreed with it in the principle of consistency. With this application, I totally disagree with the consistency of the planning officer introducing what he calls consistency within the application of Bradley Hall. Mr. Saley has got a next door neighbour who has got a single garage, who wanted a single bathroom putting up above her garage and wanted one conservation roof light putting in the rear of this garage. Planning officer turned it down because it was in breach of the fabric of the Grade 2 listed building that she was living in. And yet Mr. Staley has applied for, I think it's 7 windows, a swimming pool and everything else. Now, if that does not constitute disrupting the fabrication of a listed building, then I don't know what is. And that's where my point is as regards as the consistency within the planning application being like for like. It's really, really, I just felt unfair to have one rule for one and one rule for the other. And then literally an hour after the planning officer submitted his application saying he's approving it, Mr. Staley's wife put on a village social media group that it's not what you know, it's who you know. So that raised alarm bells to me, and that's why I'm here now, because I find it very difficult to talk in front of everybody, and it didn't seem right. I really, really hope that every letter that has been submitted to the council has been read by all of you guys, rather than just basing it on one planning officer, and you can see, yes, I understand there is a suit, like Mr. Staley says, there is the odd thing in there that will be not relevant, but there's an awful lot of information in there which is relevant to the actual application. And my final point is that Mr. Staley's record of developing houses and moving them on is such that he leaves a trail of destruction. And once we start
30 seconds.
Once we start work on this house, the Bradley Hall, once it's been taken away, you'll never get it back. The heritage of the building will be gone. That's it.
Okay, thank you very, very much. Okay, the next on my list is Councillor Ernie Mitchell, Chair of the Parish Council. You have 3 minutes and I'll indicate when you have 30 seconds left.
Thank you for this opportunity to speak. The villagers are concerned of this development becoming a holiday development, and of it spoiling a very nice small village with no amenities. And also there was a problem earlier in the year with this property, with the resulting with police being involved, with people going around the village, knocking on people's doors in the early hours. These people were staying at Bradley Hall. Some of the elderly residents were very frightened by this and very upset. The applicant has said that his hot tubs, nobody uses them after 10:30 at night. Well, we've had reports come to me that there's been people using the hot tubs at 4:30 in the morning. And it does concern people, the noise. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The last on my list is Mr. Duncan Bratt, All Saints Bradley Parochial Council. You also have 3 minutes, and I'll indicate when you have 30 seconds left.
Thank you. Well, I'm here to represent All Saints Church Bradley as a member of the Parochial Church Council. Let me say, first of all, that this applicant appears to have a history of converting large private properties into accommodation for groups of holidaymakers. This has coloured our judgment as to what is really the purpose of this application. Bradley Church has been at the centre of the village for a very long time, since 1370, and an important element in creating and fostering the community spirit we have. Bradley Hall is in close proximity to the church on the other side of the road. It is the 2 hot tubs installed without planning consent which have been the main cause of the disruption in the centre of the village, with loud music and inappropriate behaviour at unsocial hours. The District Council considered that the operation of a hot tub would not result in significant noise pollution of the area, which would warrant the refusal of planning permission in this case. On the contrary, this has not been the experience of the village, nor have the environmental health regulations been in evidence as a way of sorting this out. These holiday lets were of no concern under previous owners when there were no hot tubs. Further facilities are now being added: a swimming pool, jacuzzi, games rooms and a kitchen complex. We note that the conversion of the attic space to habitable accommodation has been removed. In our view, retrospective planning consent should not be granted for the hot tubs, and conditions imposed on the pool for private use only. This is to stop the risk of this property evolving into a holiday destination inappropriate to the character of this rural village. With such conditions, the church at the heart of the village and its inhabitants would rest assured that the tranquility of Bradley village would not be compromised. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay, members. Joe, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So members will have visited the site yesterday to appreciate the development and its impact on neighbouring residents and the heritage asset that is Bradley Hall. Regarding the comments made by previous speakers, the District Council's Design and Conservation Officer has assessed the application and deemed there to be no harm to the heritage asset as a result of the development. The officer's report sets out that officers do not have concerns with regards to any amenity issues, whether from the proposed hot tubs. And a lot of the concerns relate to a potential change of use of the hall to a holiday let, but this isn't currently proposed as part of this application. The applicant set out that this is going to be for his own personal use. If at a later date evidence became that it was being used as, I think some representations referred to as a party house, that would constitute a change of use of the property and would require a separate grant of planning permission. But at the moment, we're dealing with this as a householder application as an extension to a residential dwelling. So, in my view, the only material planning considerations in this case are the impact on the heritage asset and amenity of neighbouring occupants. I'm happy to take any questions.
Questions, members? Councillor Archer.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, there's an issue with trust here, I think, between people in the village and the applicant. Regarding the use of the pool, one question, if we were to approve this and the pool was to be built, is there any way we could condition to make sure that the pool is only allowed to be used for the primary resident and owner of the hall and put a condition on that at this stage? Is that possible? So that's one question. And you touched on this next one a little bit, what you said, but just to get a bit more clarification. If the current applicant and owner was to expand to try and do what some of the villagers feel they're planning to do, to try and make it into a bigger scale holiday let, how exactly would that process work? What would they have to do? How could that be stopped? And the final question is about enforcement with the noise pollution. Obviously, the hot tubs aren't meant to be in use after 10:30, but I know from what residents have said tonight and other people I've been in communication with as well, that isn't always the case, and there has been significant noise pollution later on at night. Is there anything else that can be done to enforce that rule that they're not used after 10:30?
Thank you for the questions, Councillor Archer. I'll come back on those, if I may. First question relates to the swimming pool and the use of the swimming pool. I think if members were concerned about the commercial use of the swimming pool and associated comings and goings and association with that use, and the potential impacts that could have on the occupants of nearby residential properties, and I think it would be legitimate to make it absolutely clear, although this is a householder application, and the purposes would have to be for use ancillary to the main dwelling house. If you were concerned about commercial use, belt and braces, you could impose a condition that it makes it absolutely clear it is only for the personal use of the occupants of the main dwelling house. That would be a perfectly reasonable condition in my view. Second question related to holiday let use. What members have got to be mindful of here is the existing hall can be used as a dwelling house falling within use class C3. The C3 use class does include 6 people living together as one household. The key here is living together as one household. If you were to offer the property up as a holiday let, then families meeting or coming together to holiday as one household in the premises wouldn't need planning permission. It wouldn't amount to a material change of use of the property. What we need to be careful of and what we need to monitor is the use of the property as a party house. If there were multiple people coming to the property from all parts of the country to holiday together, then I think that is a change in the character of the use, and that would involve a change of use of the building that would require planning permission in my view. And it's a case of just monitoring the use. The applicant has made it clear that it's not his intention to operate the property as a party house or as a house for multiple people to holiday there. It is his intention to live there in the property as his family home. So I think we have to accept the application on that basis. We have no grounds or reasons to consider or to look at it in any other way. The final question relates to hot tubs. Again, I think we need to be mindful of whether hot tubs in themselves constitute development. There is case law, there's various appeal decisions that conclude that hot tubs, which don't need to be installed by a builder, that can be carried away by 4 people and don't require any mechanical lifting. In those instances, they don't require permission. Planning permission is required in this case because there's associated structures. So we've got a gazebo structure and we've got a structure being built around the hot tub itself. That structure and associated use requires planning permission, but I think we need to be careful about imposing conditions that aren't necessary in planning terms, but also wouldn't be unenforceable. We have to accept that people can have hot tubs in the curtilages of their properties. There's various types of hot tubs, plug-and-play hot tubs, inflatable hot tubs. They don't constitute development. We don't routinely receive applications for hot tubs because it's common that such structures aren't development. So I think if nuisance were to arise from the use of the hot tubs and the use of the curtilage by people holidaying in the holiday properties or the main dwelling house, we have got powers, environmental health powers, to deal with that. And we have successfully utilised those powers in addressing a similar situation where a holiday let with a hot tub was causing problems locally, and it was agreed through taking those actions that hot tub would be removed because of the nuisance that were resulting from its use. I hope that's answered your three questions.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Purdy.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I'll say straight away I've got some concerns about this application. There's been some serious allegations made this evening against the applicant, and it's very difficult, I presume, for us to bring that into this conversation, but I just wonder if the officers are aware of any of those allegations. And also, we've only learnt tonight about these ecclesiastical implications. Are the officers aware of those prior to this late rep?
Yes, just to be clear on that, ecclesiastical exemptions are exemptions that apply to church buildings. So I was wondering if comments made in that respect relate to some covenants in favour of the church. This property is in separate ownership. It's a private dwelling house. I can only see legal covenants that might be in place, but they're not material to the assessment of this planning application. It'd be a civil matter for the covenants or the covenants that are in favour of that landowner to take up with the owner of Bradley Hall, or the applicant in this case.
Okay, Gary, yeah. Happy with that?
Sorry, yes, I am aware of the applicant having an interest in lots of historic buildings in the Derbyshire district. There is a case that I'm aware of in the Cromford area where the authority did take action against some unauthorised works to a listed building. We did take action and we pursued that through an injunction application to the court, and we successfully remedied the unauthorised works to that building to safeguard it. I think it's worth pointing out to members of the public that we have had applications for works to this property in the past. So we are aware of it, we are aware of its significance, we are aware of elements of it that are historically important and special. And if works were to be carried out to the building and that was brought to our attention, then we'd pursue it in a similar manner to what we did at Cromford. We will pursue enforcement action where it's necessary to do so. But I think we have to trust the applicant that they've submitted an application here for listed building consent to carry out works to the property. I think if they were to carry out future works, they know the process, and we have to trust that they will submit an application and follow correct procedure.
Thanks, Chris. If I come back, it might be a question for Lee here. There's some public disbenefit alleged this evening in that there are members of the public in Bradley who wish to be here and can't be here, so we won't hear their voice. I'm thinking at the moment, in the back of my mind, about moving for deferment, so I'd just like to hear your thoughts on that, please, Lee.
I think the only issue, Chair, is a public meeting and members of the public are entitled to turn up. As you can see, we've had some late representations, and if they were unable to attend, that they could have written in those representations in time to be heard by this committee. The fact they not turn up wouldn't affect any validity of the decision taken.
Thank you, Lee. The next on my list is Councillor Donnelly.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. My question basically is around the conditioning in these hot tubs. I think we heard yesterday on the side they were conditioned until 10 o'clock. I think that is far too late. I think surely we should put better conditions on that. My other thought on that really, is the hot tubs necessary? That's my question.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Donnelly. I think we need to be mindful again of what the application involves. So the hot tubs we consider require permission by virtue of the gazebo type structure and the permanence of these particular hot tubs. I think to condition the use of the hot tubs would be an inappropriate condition in my view. I don't think it passed the tests of necessity in planning terms to make the development acceptable, and I don't think we'd be able to effectively police the condition either. The best way to tackle any nuisance arising from the activity would be through environmental health legislation and not planning legislation in this case.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dunn. Councillor Finesse.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Well, basically, I suppose my question is similar to the last one from Councillor Donnelly. It's about these hot tubs, you know, and the fact that we've heard tonight that there have been hot tubs used at 4:30 in the morning. I mean, is there any controls we can put on that, you know, in this application?
I think it'd be inappropriate to impose planning conditions to control the use, but I think if there is nuisance arising from the use of the hot tubs, that'd be a matter that would need to be flagged with our environmental health team. They have powers to take action, positive action through noise abatement notices and require a remedy in that respect. So it's environmental health legislation would be the most appropriate tool at our disposal to deal with that issue.
So they would have to do it first, and then it would be looked at. Is that what you're saying? Yeah.
I think what we've got to be mindful of is, does a hot tub in itself need planning permission? I mean, there's no associated change of use of land. It is curtilage to the hall or the holiday lets at this particular site. So you could have an inflatable hot tub and you could have a similar level of noise arising from that activity. I think to impose conditions in respect of this application would be inappropriate in that respect.
Would the same thing apply to the swimming pool?
Well, the swimming pool is in a different part of the site. I think the commercial use of it may raise issues in terms of increased comings and goings and activity and noise from that use. But the applicant has made it clear that it's for his own personal use. And I think a condition for belt and braces really is to make sure that it's restricted to that use only. It would be appropriate if members were concerned about potential commercial use of the swimming pool.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Finesse. The last on my list for questions is Councillor O'Brien, then we'll go into debate.
Thank you, Chair. Personally, I think the application should have been taken the other way around. I think we should have looked at the listed building consent application first. I'll tell you why, because I'll make the question here, because I think we're talking about the hot tubs. My question would be, in relation to the LBC, is how do you arrive at the conclusion that the erection of hot tubs and gazebos within the curtilage of a listed building, which affects the setting of the listed building, doesn't require listed building consent? That's the first question. My second question, again, really relates to the LBC, but as you've included the identical conditions in the planning application, I need to raise it here, and this relates to page 12 of the report, paragraph 4, the second bullet point, where you're talking about the conservation officer's talking about the glazed openings and is making recommendations as to amendments to that design. But that hasn't been carried through into your recommendations. So my question is, why is that recommendation in paragraph 4, bullet point 2, not being incorporated in the recommendations for planning consent?
Thank you for the questions, Councillor O'Brien. The first question, if you just remind me what that was. So I've just been focusing on the second part.
Well, I'm raising it now, Chair, because I think we talked about the gazebos and the hot tubs and the need or otherwise for planning permission and what have you. My view would be that since they are within the curtilage of a listed building and they affect the setting of a listed building, they require listed building consent. You said they don't, but my question is, how have you arrived at that conclusion?
Sorry, yes, thank you for that. I think what I'm saying is the gazebo structure does need listed building consent, it doesn't need listed building consent, it needs full planning permission, because any structure within the curtilage of a listed building automatically needs planning permission. There's no physical attachment to the to historic fabric to warrant listed building consent. It is just full planning permission that's required. What I was saying is the use of a hot tub in itself, because a hot tub on its own isn't necessarily development, and I rely on relevant case law in that area and appeal decisions. So the structures, just to be clear, the structures need planning permission, don't need listed building consent, but a hot tub in itself doesn't necessarily constitute development. In relation to the second part of your question, we have had further discussions with the council's conservation design officer about the detail of the extension and the provision of the openings, and it was felt that those elements on their own didn't constitute harm to the listed building, hence why that's not carried through into a condition. But if members felt that that was an important detail and without it would result in harm, then I think a condition to control the detail of the opening and lintels and everything else would be acceptable.
So can I just follow up with that, Chair? You're saying the answer to the first question, you don't consider that the erection of a gazebo, which requires full planning permission, you don't consider that affects the setting of a listed building?
Well, I think what you need to think about is the significance of the hall. The hall is a private residence. It's a dwelling house, technically. So structures within the curtilage of a private residence of that nature, of a domestic nature, doesn't necessarily amount to harm.
And so it amounted to harm. I asked you whether it affects the setting.
Well, any structure within the curtilage of a building can affect the setting, but you have to have regard to the building, its significance, and its significance in this case is a large detached dwelling house.
Okay, Councillor O'Brien, the last on my list before we go into debate is Councillor Gamble.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, back to the hot tubs yet again. I'm just going back to the point where you said you sort of leave it to an environmental health to sort of basically sort of police these hot tubs. But presumably environmental health doesn't have any ability to condition the time that a hot tub is used. It can only presumably measure the amount of noise nuisance it creates. So wouldn't a timed actual condition on the hot tub actually help environmental health, in that presumably if the time expired then no noise should be created, rather than having to try and sort of measure an amount of noise? Wouldn't that not be?
In sort of very simple terms, if we impose a planning condition, it will be expected that we police that condition through planning legislation, and we'd have to satisfy a magistrate that we were trying to control something that was necessary in the first place in planning terms. And I think we'd be at risk of imposing conditions that do not meet the test for conditions set out in national guidance. We have far more effective powers to deal with these problems through environmental health legislation. Nuisance arising from the use of the hot tubs can happen at any time of the day. I think if it's being used late in the evenings and that was the source of the nuisance, then environmental health would have power in serving a noise abatement notice to restrict or prevent the use on social hours.
Just before you continue, Councillor, I think Lee has something to offer.
Thank you, Chair. It wouldn't help environmental, a time limit wouldn't help environmental prosecution, because environmental prosecution is based on nuisance and noise volumes and that, etc. This would be a breach of planning, not necessarily a breach of...
But it means, oh, right, sorry, I meant the authority then as a whole, though, that it would mean you would have a planning avenue if environmental has turned up and the noise wasn't at a sufficient level.
That is a potential, that you would have a planning prosecution for breach of planning control rather than, but a time limit, as what you said in your question, wouldn't help in a prosecution.
Thank you.
Okay, so now I'm going to move into debate.
Sorry, could I ask just one more question on terms of just an interest. I know we talked about it being a party house, and that would be a change of use. What if this became a wedding venue? Because I'm just thinking the sort of things that are happening here. This it certainly is in line with. You might not think it's, but in the Peak District, this is quite a popular thing, like using a large house as a wedding. Would that be a change of use if it became a wedding venue?
Yeah, just to be clear, so a wedding venue would be a leisure and assembly use, so it would amount to a material change of use of the premises.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, Lee.
Yeah, and just to add that if it was a wedding venue, then you potentially have licensing issues that would then be able to put on controls.
They quite often just use them as the party. It ends up, when I say wedding, it ends up with basically reception and where to stay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So now I'm going to move into debate. Councillor Purdy.
Chair, if you may give me permission, I've got a couple of questions before debate, which I really need to tease out. One is the very serious suspicion hanging over planning. It's not the first time somebody's alleged the brown envelopes. We have a comment on a WhatsApp here about it's not what you know, it's who you know. I don't know how we can get to the bottom of that, but it does cast a sort of shadow over this. But I want to turn now to comments by Councillor Shirley and tease, if I may, Conservation Officer's views on this development, because I must confess I'm surprised that we're approving this, to be frank with you. So, National Policy Framework Conserving and Enhancing the Historic Environment is the government policy document, leads all planning policy to listed buildings. When considering the impact of a proposed development on a listed building, great weight should be given to the asset's conservation. The more important the asset, the greater the weight should be, even if the potential harm is less than substantial harm. And I think, you know, we've probably got we're always going to get a difference of opinion, aren't we? You know, you've got, officers got the opinion and probably got their opinion, and we've got to try and sort of come to that decision. So any harm to a designated heritage asset should require clear and convincing justification. Are we satisfied that what is being proposed here is not going to give substantial harm to this building?
Substantial harm in MPPF terms is quite significant harm to a heritage asset. What we're saying here, and we have to trust the expert advice of our well-renowned and respected conservation and design officer, he hasn't found harm here. Even if there's less than substantial harm in MPPF terms, there's a requirement to weigh that against the public benefit to be derived. We'd accept there isn't much in the way of public benefit here, it's all private benefit, but we aren't at a point where we've identified less than substantial harm, and we've certainly not identified substantial harm. So we're happy that the property has been preserved and wouldn't be no harm resulting from the development to warrant refusal on such grounds.
Anyway, members, open to you. We're in debate. Councillor Archer.
Could you just come back to the potential condition that I mentioned in the questions? Are we able, I'm not saying necessarily which way I'll go on this when I vote, but at the start of the debate, is it possible to consider putting a clear condition on in terms of use of the pool and making sure that it's restricted purely to the owner of the main house?
There's a standard condition that we could impose, just to make it clear that the swimming pool shall be for the personal use of the occupants of Bradley Hall as a private dwelling house and for no commercial purposes whatsoever.
Can I propose that condition? Is that it then, please?
Yeah. What we'll do is we'll get that added to when it's moved and seconded. Okay. Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Chair. I have to say that I too am surprised that our officers are happy with the scale and with the scale of the alterations, because they are significant, and I have to say my own view is they do significantly affect the character of an important listed building. I'm surprised that our planners have rejected the advice of the Conservation Officer with regard to the design, part of the design of the swimming pool. The building is, as we know, immediately adjacent to the church and its grounds, and I think in these circumstances, and given the scale and type of the alterations, then I would have hoped that we would have sought the advice of Historic England in order to reach a balanced judgment. So my preference would be that in relation to the application, that we do seek their advice. And I have to say, I have to disagree with our officers. I do think that given that the gazebos and hot tubs are of sufficient size and scale to require a full planning application, they will therefore require listed building consent because they are within the courtesy of a listed building, and to me it's fairly obvious that they are self-evident and they will affect the setting of that listed building, which is the criterion used to require listed building consent. So I have to disagree with you there, but I think I would support a deferral pending advice from Historic England.
Chair, just to come back on that point, Historic England are very clear in terms of when we should consult them. This isn't an application where they would ask us to consult them. They have limited resources and only comment on applications when particular triggers are met. So whilst we could consult them, it'd be very unlikely that they'd comment, and what they do is they direct us to our own conservation advice.
Councillor Gamble.
Well, I don't know if Councillor Purdy seconded that, but I would like, if that hasn't gone, I would like to second it as well. I'll go along with that. Okay, I don't think we should second guess what Historic England reaction is going to be to that request. I think we should make it. And also a deferral will then give us time as well to get a clearer answer, which I would like, on the points raised about the I know there's lots of things like legal implications and documentation, but I would prefer that we made a decision with a clearer idea about what that was. So I would like deferral for a proper consultation with Historic England and resolution of these items that were brought up.
Okay. Nobody else on my list to speak. It's been moved and seconded for deferral. Of course you can, yeah.
My concern here really is, I personally think there's too much impact on this heritage asset. And then there's question marks. I refer to the brickwork, which we didn't identify its history of, under that arched window. I'm concerned about the impact of that swimming pool. I'm concerned about it becoming a party house, I have to say. I would like to see evidence of the ecclesiastical, just in case there is some covenant there that impacts upon that listed building, because, you know, they're intrinsic to each other. So I just worry that there might be something that we're missing. And I think it's important, therefore, for a deferral to dig down into these matters, and for the future committee decision on this to have more information. And that's where I'm coming from, Chair.
Right, okay then. So, as it stands, it's been proposed and seconded for the deferral, with everything listed from Councillor O'Brien and Councillor Purdy. So I'll go to the vote. All those in favour of deferral, please show. All those against? That's been carried, so it's been deferred. So now we'll move on to the listed building consent, which is application 5.2, application number 21/01346, listed building. Anyway, Joe, over to you.
Yes, so again, obviously members went out to site and we've obviously been through the various implications of the planning application previously. As Chris set out, we didn't think the hot tub and associated buildings and gates required listed building consent. That's why they're excluded from this application. The slight alteration with this one is it does include 3 internal openings which aren't currently they're proposed. Yeah, I think we've been through most of the issues there, so I'm happy to take questions on the listed building application.
Question, member, or do you want to move straight into debate? Anybody want to question Councillor Purdy?
No question. I think we need to follow what we've just approved, Chair, and that's for deferral to keep the two together.
So are you happy to move it?
Yeah.
Are you happy to second it, Councillor O'Brien, for the deferral? Okay then, we'll vote on that then. So it's been the list of building consent for deferral of the reasons in the full application. All those in favour of deferral, please shout. All those against? That's been carried. Thank you very much. Right, moving on, application 5.3, which is single storey front extension at 1 Lime Tree Road, Matlock. This is application number 21/01449 full. Are you taking this, Joe? Okay. Don't know whether there's any late reps on it. And we have one speaker on this. So I'll just look and see if there's any late reps. There is. No, there's no late reps, so we'll go straight to the speaker. So on my list is Mr. James Taunton, local resident, or his wife. Okay, no problem. You have 3 minutes, and I'll indicate when you have 30 seconds left.
Thank you for letting us speak. Our main concerns with this property is that we are directly behind the property and we have a car parking space, kind of area behind the property which is privately owned by us. And the residents in that area that unfortunately weren't able to come tonight are all concerned that even now with the parking that the property has currently, which although they have classed as not formally parking, they have a sign there that says that they have parking basically. And where even with that parking there, we find that in busy times of the shop, one, we can't get in and out of our driveway because both the lorries for the shop and the customers themselves park over our driveway, which is actually our land in the first place, looking on the deeds. And then they come down into our parking spaces and use our parking spaces in the first place, and also are leaving litter, which we've literally watched people open their car door, put the litter on the floor and drive off, which has never been addressed by the shop. There's a lot of litter around that area, which we expect is very much an environmental hazard, and we have seen vermin coming around because of the litter. So the main concerns are with the removal of the traffic, like the parking spaces, that one, people will be parking in our areas, two, they'll be parking over, double parking on the road, which happens already, which is quite a dangerous junction in the first place where we are, and it's quite difficult to get out because cars on the main road don't particularly slow down for going around that corner. So if there's more traffic and more cars parked, then that could cause serious accidents. And with also the heavy goods vehicles that come to deliver to the shop, they can't actually turn round, and they have caused damage to our property where we've tried to stop them kind of coming down into our area, because they with Hurst Rise being one way, they can't go up Hurst Rise to turn round.
30 seconds left.
So yeah, although we appreciate the reasoning for the extension of the shop and it will be used by the locals, it's also concerned that it's going to hinder the locals. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyway, Joe, over to you.
Yes, so this is another site that members will have visited yesterday and appreciated the extent of the extension proposed. Obviously, you'll be aware from the officer's report there's concerns regarding the parking issues raised by the previous speaker. We have dug out the original application file for the shop from 1953, and there's no formal parking arrangement set out in that application. It was granted unconditionally. So in that regard, the informal parking arrangement will still remain. There's no change there. I think there's been no concerns raised by the local highway authority in this regard as well, and any issues with informal parking, I think local highway authority have set out that would be a police matter that could be addressed in that way rather than through the planning process. I think that's, yeah, I'm happy to take questions.
Thanks, Joe. Questions, members? Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Chair. You quite rightly say in the report that policy PD1 requires development to be of a high quality design, contributes positively to an area's character, etc. Can you explain how you consider this development is of a high quality design and how it positively contributes to the area's character?
Yeah, so I think it's set out in the officer's report that the shop currently has been subject to various alterations and extensions in the past. The provision of this 3-metre extension to the front, albeit with a flat roof, isn't considered to be harmful to the area. I think it's proposed with a parapeted roof, and it's deemed in this case to be an appropriate design for what is a retail premises. I think that's the view of officers, really.
So, Chair, if I always do ask for replies to my question, which is how do you consider it to be a high quality design and one that contributes positively to an area's character? Not that it is acceptable, but how is it of a high quality and how does it contribute positively?
I think members have to be realistic in their application of that policy. What we're dealing with here is a building that doesn't contribute significantly to its surroundings. It's a relatively simple building, simple construction, been altered and extended significantly in the past. We're dealing with a subservient modern element at the frontage of the building, which will articulate the existing frontage, so it's more prominent in the street scene, but it's not considered to be detrimental. It maintains the status quo, if you like. It certainly isn't harmful, and I think it complies with policy PD1 in that respect. So, as the converse question to you, Councillor O'Brien, is: do you feel it doesn't comply with the policy, and what reasons would you give for that?
No, Councillor O'Brien, you don't want to come back?
I'll leave that till debate.
Okay.
Yes.
Councillor Purdy.
Subjective opinion, isn't it, really? I just wanted to tease out the parking aspect for the benefit of Mrs. Trunson. I hope I've pronounced that correctly. Highways we have to follow, and they've not given us an objection. And I'm referring to 7.8, highway safety parking. Local plan policy HC21 sets out parking standards. Was there any question raised with the applicant about any parking provision, bearing in mind it's going to offset parking, although we did think on site that there would still be lateral parking on the pavement rather than vertical into the shop? Was there any question raised with the applicant as to parking provision? I mean, he's got to be a good neighbour, surely.
Yeah, this matter has been raised directly with the applicant in terms of whether provision can be made for alternative parking to compensate for the displacement of parking as a result of the extension. And we've had a similar conversation with the applicant that we've had with the local highway authority, that the existing arrangement is an informal one. There is no dedicated parking as such. Technically, vehicles parking and crossing over the footway. That could potentially continue, although you would have clearly more of an obstruction of the footway fronting the premises. But it's an informal arrangement. There was never any dedicated parking to serve the store. People have just parked in that area.
Okay, Councillor Gamble.
So it was just a question really, or just on the statement that you made when you said you'd looked into the past of the statement. Are you saying then, effectively, because something was built in 1953, when obviously car ownership was somewhat lower than it is now, that's what that building is now stuck with?
I think that's a good question, Councillor Gamble, because what we're dealing with here is an increase in retail offer, aren't we, or retail floor space. So you could argue, well, that may result in an increase in demand for parking. But we have to trust the local highway authority and the highway engineers. We have to think about the location of the premises within a town centre. It'll serve surrounding houses, and the highway authority is satisfied that lack of parking in this particular case wouldn't constitute a highway safety issue, that they could sustain appeal So we have to take into consideration the comments of the Highway Authority in that regard.
When you had the discussion with Highway, can I just ask, did the subject of deliveries come up? And this has come up, I mean, I think the lady raised it is quite a different thing to a car coming up to that place than the big, I think she mentioned, on one of the things, mentioned the roll-off sort of cage deliveries that they have on there. I mean, was that discussed how you would actually the deliveries would take place? Or was it just assumed that the only parking was for people shopping there in their cars?
When the Highway Authority look at the application, they'll look at all manners of vehicle activity. I think what they'll have regard to is the existing use. So there's already a shop there that will be serviced by delivery vehicles, and I wouldn't know without asking them myself, but they will have attributed a use based on existing delivery vehicles to and from the site, and the nuisance or the impacts that may have on highway safety. I'm assuming that they don't consider the increase in the retail floor space to be material to result in any intensification of that activity.
Why not? I'm just thinking more space is a shop with more things in it, which presumably have to be delivered by something.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that the Highway Authority will have considered in their response, but it's a question that we'd have to direct to the Highway Authority. But we have to trust that they've looked at this application. It's clear what the application's for. It's for extension of the existing shop, and they'll have had regard to vehicle movements attributed to a shop of that size.
Do you know what those figures that they've come up with are for the increased delivery movements?
Well, that's for the Highway Authority. They'll have the standard sort of tricks data based on uses of premises and properties, and they will have had regard to the size of this premise and the likely frequency of vehicle movements to and from the site.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Finesse.
Thank you, Chair. I'm trying to establish pros and cons on this one, with the cons being the loss of parking. The pros, I guess, is the increase in floor space. Can you give me an idea of the percentage increase in floor space this will produce?
Might be an idea to go back. This mouse is playing up, but hopefully I can get back to a plan. When it registers, go back. Just give you an idea of proposed floor space. So if you can see on that plan there, you've got service areas at the back of the building. I mean, I'm taking a guess here, but I'm guessing it's about 30% increase in the existing floor space, probably a third of the existing size of the store.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Finesse. Councillor Archer.
Thank you, Chair. Although I'm a little bit surprised the highways haven't picked any concerns about safety. They are the experts. I'm not, so I suppose I have to take their word on that. But in terms of sort of impact on local amenity, hearing a local resident and actually going and looking at the site themselves, I think most of us will be of the opinion that there is going to be a knock-on effect here with people parking elsewhere and inconvenience for neighbours. So to what extent could we consider that as a reason possibly to refuse, rather than it being to the safety of what the highways are saying, more to do with impact on neighbours and local amenity?
Thank you, Councillor Archer. The Highway Authority have looked at the application. They consider that lack of parking or no additional provision of dedicated parking to serve the development, they consider that is not a sustainable reason for refusal on highway grounds. I think without the local highway authorities backing, we wouldn't be able to defend a reason for refusal on lack of parking grounds.
Okay. Councillor Bull.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I was just wondering, I'm looking at the plans at the front. Now they're saying, at the moment as it looks, it's all glass-fronted windows looking on it. Now they're saying it's going to be stone. Part of it is going to be stone. It's not going to be of the same all the way along. So isn't that going to change the appearance of the street scene? Not in other than the fact that it's actually coming out as a flat roof and coming along. But if you look at that bottom plan, that is just a blank wall. So can you just explain?
Yeah, if I just provide some clarity on that. So there has been some confusion relating to the extent of extensions and alterations proposed as part of this application. It is just the extension at the front. And the intention is to utilise stone to match the existing. But the vast majority of that principal elevation is a shop frontage.
Yeah.
So the appearance is not too dissimilar to the existing frontage, where you've got the shop frontage consuming the majority of the ground floor of that existing building on the principal elevation. You've got a return of stonework, but it is proposed that materials match the existing building.
You happy with that, Councillor Bull?
Oh, I'm not quite so sure what's the bottom supposed to be then, the back?
Sorry, you look so on that plan there, the bottom image.
You've got two pictures. There's one at the top that looks like the existing plan of what is, and the one at the bottom, if you're just telling me you're coming out 3 metres of the whole front of the shop with a flat roof, that isn't a whole front of the shop with a flat roof. Sorry. Yeah, well,
Sorry, just to confirm, the bottom one is the rear elevation. I think these are the proposed front and rear elevations of the premises.
Would it help if you just go to the plan before, so you can see, look at the side there, you can see the existing flat roofed side element, so that will be retained. And then if we go to the proposed plan,
so the top is going to definitely still be all windows, and it's not going to be concrete or stone.
It just gives you, I know that it doesn't help with lots of lines on drawings, but if you look at that plan, the top one, and then oh dear, sorry.
Yeah.
So it's just the projection at the front, which is just a single-storey flat-roofed element, but that line above it doesn't really help.
I've not got an issue to the fact that it's coming out a flat roof. What I'm saying is, when you look at the front of the property, are we still going to look at all the windows and a door to get into the premises?
Yes, so it's basically bringing that shop frontage out.
It didn't seem as though that was, by reading some of this design here. So, okay.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Bull. So now I'm going to move into debate. Members, Councillor Purdy.
Chair, I can't see any real good reason for refusal here. I sympathise with the residents in the area, but I think parking could be addressed by the local ward member with highways, see if they can come up with some scheme. I would recommend that. As far as Councillor O'Brien's comments are concerned, I mean, I don't want to be rude to the building, but it is I'll put it politely, it's a typical 50s building. And I think what we're trying to do with this addition is replicate, and I guess when one looks at the finished product, it might not look much dissimilar to what's, fronting it now. So, as I say, I can't see any real good reasons for refusal, so I'll move the officer's recommendations.
Thank you very much, Councillor Purdy. Councillor Lees.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Happy to second this application, on the grounds of, as written, basically. Point 7.8 to the highway safety does actually state they could actually have up to 1,000 square metres of gross floor space without parking. So, it's up to the bit of common sense parking, really. So I'm happy to second it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lees. Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you again, Chair. I simply say that the purpose of planning is to bring about an improvement to our environment. In my view, this application would achieve completely the opposite, and I have to agree entirely with the comments from Matlock Civic Association, who I think quite rightly say that what is a modest 2-storey development of no particular character, but it is the character of that part of Matlock to stick a flat-roofed extension to the front of that modest building is entirely inappropriate. And I think the Civic Association have suggested an alternative, which I think is the way we should be going. It achieves the same benefits to One Stop, to Tesco, to increase their floor space, but produces a design which respects the modest design of that structure, and I think that'd be entirely appropriate. On the parking, I think it's quite clear. I don't really care what the highway authorities say. When I look at that, I see it's quite clear that taking 3 metres out of that parking space is going to result on vehicles parking haphazardly and parking.
Is someone speaking?
Excuse me, I was just asking one of my members to turn the microphone off. Carry on, Councillor O'Brien. I'm sorry for that interjection.
Yes, I think it's quite clear to me that, and I think to those of us who look closely and carefully at the site, that taking 3 metres out of that parking apron is going to result in haphazard parking and vehicles obstructing the footpath. Now, to say that that's a matter for the police, I think that is an absurd justification for allowing a development which is going to have that impact. It is up to us as a good planning authority, as I said, to produce developments which are going to improve the situation. If we approve an application which we think there is a high degree of risk of causing that sort of disruption, vehicles parking on the pavement, I think it's up to us as a responsible authority and in fact with a duty of care to our local community to have regard to that. So I find it astonishing that the applicants have paid absolutely no regard to the parking situation at the front. They've shown no responsibility by looking at the implications of their development. They've made no proposals at all as to how vehicles using their premises could be accommodated, and I think that is just totally irresponsible on their part. So I feel both on design grounds and in terms of the impact that the changed parking arrangements and the high degree of risk that the footpath is going to be obstructed, then I will be unable to support this application.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor O'Brien. Councillor Gamble.
Well, I've got to say I agree with all those comments. I think a flat roof, pull out of that thing is going to look awful from the front, and when you put forward the side elevation, it looks even worse from the side. It is undoubtedly going to create an uglier building, and I think Councillor Archer brought up very good points about the increased footfall that this will attract, which will affect the amenity of local residents. It will alter. When we were there, it was very clear. It was that pavement was heavily used for parking. That parking is going to go somewhere. I think it's an almost abdication of our role as a planning authority to just sit there and say, oh, well, if anyone parks somewhere, we call the police.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Donnelly.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was going to second the application because looking at the site visit yesterday and looking at the design, well, so be it. But I think that the benefits will be gained by this 3-metre extension will be much outweigh the damage done to the area. And I think also that it would be very beneficial to the local people shopping. Obviously, people not going down to Matlock and using their cars and all this sort of thing. So I think the benefits will be much enhanced by this application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Donnelly. Councillor Furness, should I say?
Oh, thank you, Chair.
It's my hand round to you.
I mean, I take Councillor O'Brien's point about there may be a better plan, which should be here, but it isn't. We have to vote on the one that's before us. And I think there are benefits with this plan, so I'm going to support it. In my village, Bradwell, the co-op increased its floor area by 30%, and it's made a huge improvement on the house, on the shop itself, and the service to customers. So I'm all for it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Furness. The last on my list before I go to the vote is Councillor Archer.
Thank you, Chair. Just in reference to other places where there's co-ops, there's a new one built at the top of Hill and Ashbourne, and the parking provision there has proved to be inadequate. We've had lots of HGVs and big vehicles parking on the road, which has caused all sorts of problems. And although this is different, it's a different location, I'm really worried about that. However, I accept what the highways say. The issue of the design and the roof, I think I know what the answer to this is going to be, but I'm going to ask a question. There's no way, the suggestion of the Matlock Civil Association to try and improve the potential design, is there any way we can put a condition on that they sort of change that design to make it more in keeping with the area? Because I do have some concerns about how this flat roof is going to look. Is it possible to put a condition on to make them look at a different type of roof that is more in keeping with the local area?
I'm just coming back to you, Councillor Archer, on that question. What you've got to think is the Civic Association are asking for the extension to have a more traditional form, so to have a pitched roof, so that will either present itself in the form of a series of gables on the frontage or a pitched roof that will compromise the first floor of the existing building to the extent where you'd have a continuation of that roof right along the frontage. I think that would result in a much more incongruous form, or you'd have a double pile type design. And for a projection at just 3 metres, again, that's going to be a very incongruous built form. I think it is what it is. It's a simple, modest extension at the front of the building. It read as a later subservient addition. I don't think it will result in harm to the character of the existing building.
Okay, thank you very much, members. So it's been moved and seconded for approval. All those in favour, please show. All those against? Oh, so it's been carried. Thank you very much. So moving swiftly on. So we'll do application 5.4 next, which is number 21/01536. This is a variation of condition. We have no registered speakers on this, so we'll do this application and then we'll have a comfort break and we'll get on with the rest of the agenda. So, Chris, are you taking this one? Okay, Chris.
Thank you, Chair.
I mean, like I say, there is a few late reps, so why Chris is doing the presentation if you want to read that.
Yes, so the late representations are basically comments from Derbyshire Wildlife Trust. So they have basically advised that there are no additional ecological impacts associated with the proposed changes. Officers do have delegated authority to issue decisions under Section 73, which are minor amendments effectively to development that's already been granted planning permission. The reason I've brought this item to Planning Committee is I felt that the degree of changes proposed changed the design of the proposed building quite significantly. I wanted members to consider those impacts and be satisfied that the development continues to contribute positively to its environment. I was trying to bring the plans up just to assist members in the right way. So in terms of the changes proposed, the general footprint of the building remains the same. The general design remains the same. However, there is an increase in built mass. And officers have sought amendments to the design of the building. Sorry to keep flicking between slides. So see there at the top image, you've got a central sort of atrium element, and then you've got subservient wings. And the proposal introduces mass to those wings. So you've got an additional height in the form of a sail suite, and then you've got a pergola structure on the other wing. And the symmetry of the original design was an important component of it, and we felt that retaining the central atrium building as the prominent building and having the other elements reading as subservient elements was an appropriate way forward. So we have sort of amended plans which has recessed those elements to sit behind the central atrium part of the building. Other changes to the building include changes to the roof form. Originally, it was proposed to have to face the roof in copper. It's now proposed to face the roof in zinc. That'll be consistent with the walling material. The building also incorporates natural stone, so it has affinity with buildings and structures within that part of the Derbyshire Dales landscape. We're satisfied that the changes do not compromise the original design. It's still an architect design scheme. A lot of thought has gone into the design. We feel that it will be a striking building in the landscape, and it will add to the tourism offer and also the it will still involve creation of new jobs, and it will be an impressive building within the landscape that people will visit. So we're happy with the design. We think it's an appropriate response to the context. Happy to take questions. I would point out that as part of the application there were a number of other changes that were proposed that we couldn't consider as part of a Section 73 application. So we had rather grandiose entrance gates and walls to the site that we felt were inappropriate and introduced development that we hadn't considered previously. So that element's omitted from the scheme. So is associated signage on the frontage, flag advertisement, so that's been omitted from the scheme. And the rerouting of the access, that's something to be considered by planning commission. But it still secures all the net gain in terms of biodiversity. It delivers all the original benefits of the original proposal in terms of microgeneration, sustainability, credentials to help mitigate the effects and adapt to climate change. Got solar panels on the building. We've got a desire to encourage sustainable travel. You've got electric charging points. So we feel that it does offer quite a lot. It does respond as best it can to the challenges that climate change presents us with. Happy to take questions.
Councillor Furness.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, this has been going on for a few years now, hasn't it? You know, it's really ancient. Are we assured, you know, that it will take place if we approve this?
There's been issues with the funding. I think it's taken a long time to get to this point, but they have broken ground now. So they have implemented the development. They've formed a new access onto the main road. They've carried out a lot of the earthworks. So the development platforms have been created, while a pond has been formed as well. So they're well underway in terms of construction. And they have got permission, which has been lawfully implemented to build a building. This application just concerns what are minor alterations to that building.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Furness. Councillor Archer.
Thank you, Chair. There's a lot to like about this. I like lots about it, the sustainability, the solar panels, the EV charge points, and I do think they made a good attempt to nestle it into the environment, and it will bring sort of tourist revenue and interest into the area. But my concern with it is about whether or not the developer possibly is playing a bit of a game here. There's a lot of emphasis in the initial application about really making it nestle in and keeping it to a reasonable size so it didn't have a big impact on the landscape. And then there's sort of a creeping sort of expansion happening, which is a bit of a worry in terms of if developers are trying those sort of things to try and get around the planning committee. So the main question is, if this had been proposed as it is now in its original format, when it was originally agreed, are we confident that as a council we would have approved those plans then? Or are we only now approving them because it's a slight alteration to something we've already approved? So do you think if it had been put forward in this form originally, are we confident we would have said it was okay? Because it is a pretty substantial building.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Archer. The local planning authority is required to consider the cumulative impacts of any minor alterations, and this is the second application that's made under Section 73. The previous application involved very minor alterations to the building. In terms of the height of the building, the central atrium building remains at the approved height. We're only dealing with additional mass to the subservient wings. In terms of whether it would have changed officers' recommendation, members may recall that officers recommended refusal of the original application on a matter of principle in terms of the appropriateness of the location for this type of development. So I think you'd have to ask yourself that question as members, having granted the original permission for the original development.
No, it was originally done in 2015. Anyway, Councillor O'Brien.
I like this technique of turning the question back on ourselves. I note as you quite rightly say, that a number of elements were omitted from the application for process reasons. Can we have an assurance that if alterations come back subsequently, minor alterations as variations, that they will come to committee for determination, or do you feel they will be delegated to yourself? I agree with Councillor Archer. There is a sort of issue about creeping change, with a series of incremental changes which, taken together, can mount up to quite a significant change to what was originally approved.
So members have the power to override the delegated authority that is granted to officers. So if an application, I think, just to be clear, the entrance gates and the walls at the frontage of the site, anything exceeding 2 metres in height will require a separate grant of full planning permission, and we'd operate the approved scheme of delegation in the usual manner. So if we were to receive more than 5 unresolved objections, or if the ward member felt that it warranted consideration at planning committee, then they'd be able to override those powers that are delegated to officers. But if development manager can also exercise discretion. So if we felt that the proposal was sensitive, and then again we could call the item to planning committee. I think in terms of the entrance gates, I think if they're higher than 2 metres, and I think if they're of a nature as originally proposed, I think there would be concerns with the appearance, the impact on the character and appearance of this part of the countryside. So I think that would warrant consideration at planning committee, but it depends very much on the nature of the changes and the necessity of bringing an item to planning committee.
Okay. Councillor Finesse first, and I'll take Councillor Bull, then we'll go to debate.
Thank you, Chair. It's immaterial, this question, but it's just a matter of interest, because obviously they do employ quite a number of people. Can you give me the numbers of employees and the number of car park spaces? Because I guess all the employees will travel from somewhere else.
I can show you the plan. I mean, I can sit here and count the individual spaces, but there's significant parking provision. There's also an overflow parking area, which is an informal area. So in terms of no total number of parking spaces, it's significant, certainly to serve a development of this scale and nature. In terms of employees, it's a large building. I don't have the exact number of new jobs that this will create, but it's a significant number.
An idea roughly, how many?
I'd be hazarding a guess. 30.
I'll be till 30, yeah, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Finesse. Councillor Bull.
Thank you. Just looking on this, and yeah, I remember this coming to light, and yes, we did say, well, you know, it's bringing jobs, and it's a long time coming. But we were very conscious, and it was set at lower, and it wouldn't be obtrusive. And I always felt that this was going to be a workshop and a training area for this jewellery, but this looks as though they want in this rooftop to become a sales department plus cafe come whatever else, which will be more publicly domineering of seeing people moving around, especially if there's grass fronting and the like. So how come that has changed so much from the original plan? Because that really has changed.
Thank you, Councillor Bull. So the intention is that the building will still be a jewellery workshop and centre of excellence. There are ancillary elements to that use. So there's retail element to it, and the sales suite is complementary to that. So it's a sales suite that would focus on more higher end items, a VIP area, if you like. And then there's a cafe element, which again is ancillary to the prevailing use. So you'll note there's a condition which does restrict the use to that purpose, and for those other elements to remain ancillary and to not be subdivided or let or used independently of the main use on site.
Okay, so now I'm going to move into debate. Councillor Purdy.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I'm more excited now than I was in 2015 at this prospect, because I think it's going to be a fantastic tourist attraction. The applicant has been held up by the pandemic, and it has been a matter of him juggling his monies, so that's the reason for the hold-up. I think there will be 30, probably even 50 employees on site, and if you're able to go on site, I know you were not, Councillor Finesse, there is significant parking at 2 levels, and I'm pleased to hear all of the green energy subjects coming in. I think that the upper roof addition is welcome, because we were told on site that the applicant had been to London to look at the Fabergé showroom, and therefore if that's no example of quality that's coming to this product, then I think that's what the applicant's aiming for. So I think there's significant improvements, because I think we've come away from the copper, which would, I think, been quite obtrusive. So all in all, Chair, I'm happy to follow the officer's recommendation for approval.
Thank you very much, Councillor Purdy. Councillor Donnelly.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Well, like Gary was on site yesterday, and so we were in 2015. 7 years seemed a long time in the making. But I was delighted when we went on the site yesterday to see the developments really starting to take off. I think, talking about the original application, but now the update on this, I think, is much, much better. And I think looking at the economical side and for the community benefits, and also the actual application on the building will very much enhance the footfall into Carsington Water. So I think that I'm more than happy to second the application.
Thank you very much, Councillor Donnelly. Councillor Archer.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I think having been on the site visit yesterday, it was really interesting to hear a bit about the way they're designing the roofs for having a big overhang to minimise glare off the windows, which I think is important, and also using a different material to minimise glare as well. So, although when the original application went through, in principle, it's been approved to put a building there. So now we just got to weigh up the pros and cons of what these additions to it are going to be. And I think, on balance, the pros do outweigh the cons. There's going to be a building built there. It's going to be slightly bigger, which is the con in terms of impact on landscape. But I think the pros, in terms of maximising the economic benefit and the utility of the building, outweigh that potential damage of a slightly bigger building. So on balance, I shall be supporting the application. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Archer. I've got nobody else down on my list. So it's been moved and seconded. The application will be going to subject conditions. All those in favour, please show. All those against? That's a unanimous decision. And as I said, I'll adjourn the meeting now for a comfort break. So if you'd like to all come back at, shall we say, 7:45, we'll get on with the other half of the plan application. start up again. So, Jason, if you'd like to press your little buttons, and we'll get back onto it. So, the next application we have for consideration is item 5.5. Application number 22/0061 full. This is a relevant demolition of a dwelling in a conservation area and erection of replacement dwelling with associated access alterations at Chandler's West End, Wirksworth. We have no speakers on this. I don't know whether there's a bit of... There is no...
There's no reps.
No late reps on it. So, straight in. So, Chris.
Thank you, Chair. Members undertook a site visit yesterday to consider the impacts of the proposal on this part of the conservation area. Members will have noted the contribution the existing bungalow makes to the site and its surroundings. This is an innovative design in terms of the replacement dwelling. It's architect designed. The proposal is to has regard to the adjacent barn and have a close association with that building. The intention is to erect a building that presents itself as a stone wall from the frontage and then has a sort of modern agricultural barn sort of feel to it in terms of the use of zinc to the roof. It will respond positively to its surroundings. We feel that it's an appropriate design that responds positively to the history and identity of this part of the settlement and the conservation area. We're recommending approval of the application. Members will have also considered the amenity impacts of this development, and with conditions officers are satisfied there won't be any unacceptable overbearing or overshadowing effects or any significant loss of privacy to warrant refusal of the application on such grounds. Happy to take questions.
Members, open to you. Questions? Councillor Finesse.
Yes, it's just a question about the demolition of the bungalow. Thank you, Chair. And I am concerned about this because my house used to be a bungalow, and we developed it by putting a second floor on top. You know, so there was no demolition involved. And in terms of carbon footprint, it seems pretty profligate, you know, to demolish and then rebuild. Is it absolutely necessary to demolish? Is there some reason for that?
The difficulty with bungalows is they have an over-wide footprint. So in terms of introducing a first floor, it results in a non-traditional built form because the gable width isn't typical of a traditional two-storey house or cottage. They tend to have a much wider depth or a greater depth to them, which makes the roof difficult to extend without it looking like an incongruous built form in a settlement or in the countryside. This is a bespoke bit of architecture, so there are advantages to replacing what's there. You can introduce sustainable construction methods. You can introduce something that's really highly thermally efficient. Introduces things like microgeneration and other measures that will help to mitigate the effects and adapt to climate change. So there are advantages to replacing what's there, and there are disadvantages. We feel, on balance, that the proposal in this case ticks all the boxes in terms of being an appropriate design, appropriate nature of development, and also addresses climate change and the effects of climate change, makes certainly a greater contribution to the existing property in this case.
Okay, well, as long as you've considered all that, that's great. Thank you.
All right, members, questions? Any more questions? Councillor Gamble.
So could you just explain a little bit? You've come up with a phrase, responds positively to the history and the sort of context of the site that it's on. How could you just explain how it does that?
Well, generally speaking, a 1960s bungalow is what it is. It's very much of its time. This particular dwelling house, the existing dwelling house, sits next to a converted farm building. So a design that respects that architecture and that building type is more in keeping, in officers' opinion, with the history of the site as a former, in terms of it being in former agricultural use.
In what way?
Well, a bungalow is what it is. It's just a building type of that period. So the farm building that's been converted on site, the existing or the proposed dwelling is more reflective of that character. and the character as a site existed pre the erection of the existing bungalow.
If you, I suppose that's a matter of opinion, I suppose, isn't it?
It is, you come to a different view. I mean, typically speaking, a bungalow is an alien building type in the countryside. It is what it is, very much of its time.
But we do need bungalows.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Purdy.
Thanks, Chair. Chris, I'm quickly looking through conditions. Is there any condition on removal of that bungalow?
It's because the two properties overlap one another, you can't build the proposed dwelling without demolishing the existing bungalow.
Appreciate that.
It's described because technically that element needs planning permission because it's in a conservation area, so it involves relevant demolition, so we have to describe it in that way. But you can't carry out the development without demolishing what's there.
I appreciate that, but I'm thinking about taking all that build off land, and you've got no site machinery or plants should be operated, etc. But I'm just thinking about the complete takedown of that bungalow and material being taken off site. Is there any need for condition, hours of work and stuff?
I think you could extend the condition to include acts of demolition within those hours, and you could also encourage the use of any materials that can be reclaimed. You may be able to utilise some of those in the construction of internal walls, for example.
Right. I'm also thinking about neighbours, because once you start demolishing that building, there's going to be an awful lot of dust and whatever material, flying in the atmosphere.
If you're concerned about the impacts of demolition and potential noise and dust from that activity, we could ask for a scheme to be submitted which would deal with those adverse impacts and how we can look at controlling them.
I think we should. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Purdy. Councillor Donnelly.
Are we in debate?
Not yet. Do you want to speak in debate?
I'll speak in debate.
Okay. Councillor O'Brien.
Chair, yes, following on from, I think, the point Councillor Purdy was making there, presumably demolition of the existing bungalow would not constitute the start of development, so it wouldn't itself activate this planning consent. So would it be appropriate to impose a condition which required the contract for the rebuilding of the for the building construction to start prior to the demolition of the existing building, so as to avoid the bungalow being demolished, half demolished, and just left in perpetuity if the applicant chose not to go ahead with the new development?
A construction programme or phasing of the development condition could be implemented if members were concerned about the impacts of what a demolished building or partially demolished building will have on the character and appearance of this part of the conservation area. Demolition of the existing bungalow would constitute an operation, a material operation that's defined in the Planning Act. So it is a form of development that requires planning permission. So the act of carrying out the demolition would constitute a start on the development. So if you were concerned about the development being left in a state of partial demolition and you were concerned about the adverse impacts on the conservation area, then I think a phasing condition would be appropriate in that respect.
Okay, thank you very much. I've got nobody else down on my list for questions, so I'll move into debate. Councillor Donnelly.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Well, like other members yesterday, I visited the site and much as I agree with Councillor Gamble that we do need bungalows. But in hindsight, I think that what is going on the footprint, I think, will even more enhance the area, and I think it'll be more beneficial. So I'm happy to move the application.
Thank you very much, Councillor Donnelly. Does that find a seconder?
I'll second it with the conditions.
Yep, okay, Councillor Purdy,
please, Chair. So that's 2 points, Chris, isn't it? Point raised by Councillor Bryan. Are we talking about to clean the site completely before erection of new and to take off site as environmentally friendly as possible, subject to hours of work?
I think a programme for the phasing of the development to be agreed. I mean, there may be legitimate reasons as to why you might just need to partially demolish a building. I can't think of any reasons myself, but I think it'd be inappropriate for us to insist on the wholesale demolition if it's not practical or if there's reasons for part of the building needing to remain, and that was only for a short period of time. So I think a condition to agree the phasing of development is more appropriate.
Okay. Fine.
I'd suggest extending the hours of operation condition to include acts of demolition and measures to control dust and noise from the site.
I think it's appropriate, otherwise it's going to be a great disturbance to those neighbours. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Anybody else want to speak in debate? Yeah, Furness.
Yeah, I wasn't on the site visit, so I will take your word, you know, that it wouldn't be appropriate to sort of build a second course on this bungalow. But I would just add, you know, again, that my bungalow was in National Park in a conservation area, and yet they wanted it to go up another story, you know, to make it into a more traditional house. So I can't really, you know, it's difficult for me to sort of envisage reasons why this house couldn't be just extended upwards rather than demolished, because, you know, you've got the problem with taking the stone off site, it's got to be dumped somewhere. It all adds to the carbon footprint. Okay, thank you. But I'm for the application.
Councillor Under, do you accept what Councillor Purdy's put forward for the additional conditions in the application?
Yeah, I'm happy with those conditions, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor O'Brien.
I have to say that I'm a great supporter of innovative and contemporary design, but I do think there are some elements of this which I'm less in favour of. Can you put the north elevation back up, please, Chris?
I'll try my best. I'm having real issues with delay on the presentation. So
the reason I say is, you know, as we've heard, the proposed new building and the existing barn have a very close association, and therefore I think it's important that when we look at the redevelopment, that association is maintained. And I have to say, when you look at the openings, the doors and the windows on the barn, and then look at the roofs, the doors, the door and the windows on the extension there, I find difficulty in seeing that association is maintained there. I think they are alien, and I'd have to say the same with the roof. I mean, we have a very traditional, is it a pan-tiled roof or a clay-tiled roof on the barn? And now we're proposing an entirely different style of roof, and to me, I think that is not maintaining a close association. I'm quite happy with the south elevation. I think that's different, but here we're looking at reading the two together. So I'm a bit disappointed that our officers feel that that's appropriate. Personally, I don't. But again, it is a personal taste. But I do think that that elevation there should be more in keeping with the associated barn. It won't stop me. It won't make me oppose the application, but it makes me think that it could have been even better than it is.
Thank you, Councillor O'Brien. I respect your opinion on that. I think the design intention was that the walling material was designed to reflect a farm enclosure that you might have seen in a typical farmyard, and the roof beyond is to replicate a modern agricultural building, rather than to try and recreate history or to try and copy what's on the site. I think it's convincing as an elevation that presents that scenario where you've got a walled yard area, and then you've got a modern agricultural building which would represent the evolution of farming activity on that particular site.
Okay, thank you very much. I've got nobody else down my list. So it's been moved and seconded for approval with the addition of 2 conditions. All those in favour, please shout. Okay, all those against? And any abstentions? So that's been carried. Thank you very much. So moving on now, application 5.6. This is application number 22/0087. This is reserve matters. This is approval of reserve matters, appearance on landscaping, the erection of 1 number dwelling under outline consent 21/00887 out at Lakewood, Old Coach Road, Tansley. Now, we have no speakers on this. Don't know whether we have got a little bit of late representation, so would you like to read that first? And then I'll let Chris go into the presentation. Everybody happy? Okay, Chris, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. We've got no speakers on this item, but within the item of late representation, there's representations that have been made by the occupants of 14 May Close, and they've submitted with their representations a photograph of the site from their property. The occupants have expressed concern that the new property will only be sited 15 metres away from the boundary, and they believe it to be a contravention of current building regulations. Whilst I'm not aware of any building regulation matters being contravened by a building being sited that distance away, clearly any impacts of the development on the residential amenity of the occupants of that property is a material planning consideration. To be clear to members, we are just considering here the appearance of the development, and the landscaping outline permission has been granted, which has agreed the layout of the dwelling on site and the scale. This is a contemporary piece of architecture. Let's go back so members can appreciate the design. So you've got a modern design of property. Again, it's a highly efficient property. It's of sufficient quality, in officers' opinion, to respond positively to its surroundings. We feel that it's an appropriate design. We're happy with the siting of the building. There is an elevation that would be difficult for members to appreciate from the slide. And get back to it. There we go. The elevation facing northwest, which is in the direction of the 14 May's Close, is the proposal is for high level windows within that elevation. So there'll be no direct loss of privacy as a result of overlooking or looking out from those particular openings. What members need to be mindful of is that there is a feature window in the corner of the building, in the northwestern corner, which will afford views in the direction of 14 May's Close. Members will have appreciated that relationship. We're satisfied that the distances involved, the nature of that space, because the window will serve a bedroom as such that there wouldn't be any significant loss of privacy to warrant refusal of the application. We're happy with the impacts of the development on the residential amenity of the occupants of nearby properties, but also we're happy as well with the design and the impacts of this development on its surroundings. So happy to take questions at this stage.
Right, members, open to you. Questions? Councillor Gamble.
Sorry, Chris. I did ask to try. I sent an email this morning, but I haven't had a reply. So maybe I can ask you. How has this been designed to take account of the trees with the TPOs on?
So as part of this application, because we're considering the landscaping and the appearance, we've considered the impact of the additional or the hard standing proposed as part of this application, and the trees officer is satisfied that it wouldn't result in any detrimental impact on the trees on site. The layout is a matter that's been agreed at the outline stage. So on that outline application, again, the tree officer was satisfied, subject to conditions, that no harm would result to the trees protected by tree preservation orders. I think it's condition 5 of the outline permission requires a tree protection plan, but also an arboricultural method statement, which will consider the construction methods and will make sure that we can closely consider, you know, the type of foundations that are put in to make sure that the trees aren't adversely affected by the development.
And that will be put past Chris Payne, will it, when that comes up?
Yeah, it's a condition that Chris recommended, so Chris would consider the details of the tree protection plan and also the...
Thanks for that.
Yeah, okay.
Councillor Archer.
Thank you, Chair. Can you just a bit more detail on the feature window you just mentioned? Because when we were on the site visit yesterday, there was a lot of emphasis placed on the fact that none of the windows would directly overlook because they were at a high level. But I don't think on the site visit yesterday anyone mentioned this feature window you just mentioned. So could you, is it possible to give us a bit more detail of exactly how that will be and to what extent that will look across at the other property? Because although it is on the other side of the road, it is a very narrow road and it does feel quite close. Overall, I'm happy with the principle of this development, I think, but it is quite close to that property. And I think the idea of a window that does directly overlook is something I might have a few concerns about. So as we didn't cover that on the site visit, is it possible to give us any more detail on that, exactly how it would look and where it would look at?
Thank you, Councillor Archer. I think it's going to be very difficult for members to appreciate where that window is positioned from the images that's on the presentation. I'm happy to circulate a plan to members and just point out where that window is. In distance terms, we're talking about 14 metres from window to window from that feature window, and you will have a view from it. It's a corner, full height corner window to a part of the dwelling that will serve a bedroom. I think realistically, anyone residing in that property can have blinds or some form of privacy screen to prevent, you know, people looking into their property as much as them looking out onto other people's properties. But I think if members were concerned about that relationship, then we could condition the treatment of that particular opening to preserve the residential amenity of the occupants of the dwellings to the northwest. If it's appropriate, I'm happy to circulate a plan which shows where that window is positioned on the northwestern corner. It might be presentation to work. I just don't think you'll be able to appreciate it, you know, from the drawing that's on the presentation.
So are you saying we could consider conditioning that window is not included, and basically it's removed entirely or just changed so that there isn't an issue with the overlooking?
I think if members are concerned about direct views from that window, we can consider, I think the opening itself is fine. I think it's important that it's retained to maintain the appearance of the property, but the treatment of the glass, so whether a film's applied to prevent, you know, direct views, or whether some form of privacy screen can be introduced, or blinds or whatever. There might be all sorts of methods or measures that can be introduced to preserve the amenity of the occupants of existing dwellings.
Okay. Now I have nobody else down for questions, so I'll move into debate. Councillor Purdy.
I mean, we said on site yesterday to Mr. and Mrs. Hopkins, and it's a pity that they didn't come forward with that view before it received outline planning permission. So there seemed to be misunderstanding on site yesterday, even with some experienced members, of what we were dealing with, and that is the fact it's been approved. I personally like the design. I think I've looked up this case study houses, and it goes back to the 50s in America, and you can see that setting within those pine trees. I would like a condition suggested by Councillor Archer, but also I'd like to see some vegetation in between the pine tree trunks to try and ameliorate that view from the Hopkinson's window to that end gable.
I think a condition could be worded in a way that requires details of measures, and that could include planting, if that's a more appropriate way of addressing those impacts, and/or appropriate measures to the window.
Yeah.
Do you want me to circulate a copy of the plan showing the opening, or are members happy with that?
I'm not bothered. I'm just happy to get the grass.
I mean, unless members do want it,
unless members want to look,
and it can be sent out.
I think if we're going to put a condition on the glass, that's fine. Yeah.
Right, so I'll move the recommendation.
So you move it with the proviso that we look into some sort of glass treatment and extra vegetation or extra plantings. So we'll live. So I think you can wrap that up, don't you, Chris? Is anybody prepared to? Councillor Lees.
Thank you, Chair. I'll second it. Thank you.
Anybody else wishing to speak in debate? No? So it's been moved for approval with the additions of the conditions to do with glazed treatments and additional planting. So it's been moved for approval. All those in favour, please show. All those against? So that's been approved unanimously. Thank you very much. Moving swiftly on, item 5.7, application number 22/00126. This is list of building consent. This is only for internal layout alterations at 12 Sidney Hill, Two Dales, Matlock. Now, we have 3 speakers on this. We have some late reps. So I'll let you read through the late reps first, and then we'll go straight to the speakers. Okay, members? Yep. Nope. Looking like 1 or 2 are still doing a bit of reading, so we'll give them a bit longer. Okay, we'll carry on then. So the first on my list to speak is Mr. Rusty Hallam. He's a local resident to speak against the application. You have 3 minutes. You can go. So who do you want to go first then?
Myself, Mr. Davies.
In which case then you can go first. You have 3 minutes, and I'll let you know when you have 30 seconds left.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a director of Sidnop Hall Apartments Limited, the management company which owns the freehold of the hall, and leaseholders for each apartment are members and the sole shareholders of this company. We manage the hall and its grounds, both of which are Grade 2 listed, on behalf of all the residents. The hall was once owned by the Darwin family, while the design of the grounds, which are registered with English Heritage, has been attributed to Joseph Paxton. Bit of background. Sidnop Hall Apartments Limited strives to protect and preserve the hall and its environs to retain its heritage and environmental conservation status. We have no objection to residents making internal renovations or alterations within their apartments, so long as these are consistent with the listings, meet current building and planning regulations, and do not cause undue disruption to neighbours. We do object, however, to anything which adversely affects the external structure or appearance of the hall and its grounds. and that is why we strongly oppose this application, the plans for which are inaccurate and misleading as regards the external work that would be required. As councillors are aware from our representations and the site visit yesterday, the disruption and disturbance caused to the rear of the hall below apartment 12 would be substantial and unacceptable for the waste pipe to join the main drainage system as described. We fear structural damage to the drains that have previously burst, causing subsidence to other parts of the hall, and costly rebuilding of the orangery attached to the back of apartments 9 and 10. It would also cause extensive short-term disruption and potential damage to the grounds adjacent to this area. We have already told the applicant and her representatives that the plans are unacceptable and that we will not agree to them. Finally, I want to place on record our concern with a statement in one of the late representations you've had from the architect, Shedburn Codd. We were not asked at any point to share the plans with leaseholders and only became aware of the planning application and its proposals ourselves when alerted by the council a few weeks ago. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So which one of you two wants to go next? Oh, right. Because I've got Mrs. Nicola as well. Are you wanted to go after? Okay.
Well, I'll speak for my wife.
Okay. But you only have 3 minutes.
I normally do.
So
yeah.
I'll take you off my list, Mrs. Hallam, so to speak, and your husband's got 3 minutes. I'll indicate when he's got 30 seconds left.
Right, well, we own the apartment number 11, which is directly under number 12, where all the proposals are. Currently, due to the way the building was built, there's no insulation between the floors of the, so we can actually hear people switch their television on. You can hear what programs, you can hear them talking, you can hear them walking around the apartment. So now then, all of a sudden, she starts putting all this kitchen equipment, everything which is going to be directly above our lounge, is going to seriously impair the enjoyment that we have in the evening, or watching television or whatever. So from that point of view, we totally oppose the fact that it's going to really interfere with our personal life, if you like. That's, as I say, the other thing, the owner of number 10 has also made the point that that area where all the kitchen and everything, other appliances are going to be put, is directly against his master bedroom wall. So he has a feeling that if they start running things at night, that's going to disturb them. The other thing is, the last bit actually, really, is on number 7.5 of the thing, which says, in association with internal works to the apartment, the property owner also seeks to swap the allocated storage cupboard in the communal ground floor hallway with another resident in order that services can be, etc. Well, that's a big problem because the storage cupboard she wants to actually swap with is owned by John Parsons, who owns the flat above that 12A, and he's flatly refused to swap the cupboard. So that's that. She's also indicated that she'll then put it through the middle cupboard, which unfortunately is mine. And I'm certainly not going to let her do that either. So basically, the only way she's going to be able to get this drainage out is to put something on the outside of the wall, which I think Mr. Davis already said is going to affect the outside appearance of a listed building. It's basically all that. That's basically all I've got to say, really.
Okay, thank you very much. You do this one, Chris. So anyway, over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's important at this stage just to clearly set out to members what they're considering in respect to this application. So we're dealing with a listed building consent application for internal alterations to this apartment. The listed status is clearly set out in the officer's report. We've considered the internal alterations, which involve the installation of new stud and plasterboard partitions, the removal of some existing stud partitions, blocking up of some existing internal doorways, and forming a number of new internal doorways. It's clearly set out in section 7.3 that there is some reformatting of the use of some of the rooms as well. And this previous speakers have mentioned the potential impacts that this reconfiguration of rooms will have on their residential amenity. In planning terms, the building or the apartment can be used as a residential apartment, and the way in which those rooms are utilised by the occupants is not something that we can control through this application for listed building consent for the internal works. All we're considering is whether the grant of listed building consent in this case has special regard to the desirability of preserving the building in its setting. We're happy that the alterations proposed here are acceptable in terms of the impact on the listed building. There are no planning reasons to refuse listed building consent for the works that are proposed. The other issues that have been raised and which are cited in the representation section of this report aren't material to the assessment of this application. We recognise that the management company will ultimately have the final word on whether these alterations can take place. We can only consider the planning, the merits and the acceptability of the works on the listed building. We consider those works to be acceptable in planning terms, but it doesn't necessarily mean that authority would be given from the management company who could refuse the new occupants permission to carry out those works. Happy to take questions at this stage.
Questions, members? Councillor O'Brien.
Yes, Chair, I agree. It's really important to explain to the residents, the objectors, that as it's a listed building consent and not a planning application, this has to be concerned with the impact on the listed structure rather than the impact on individuals, if you like, or amenity, which would be the case if it were a planning application. That, rightly or wrongly, that's the way the legislation works. I think it is important to explain that to residents. My question is a technical one, really. The boundary of the application, is it precisely as shown on the plan on the screen there? That is it entirely within that line? Is it just the building, or does it include the external area, the terrace and the steps?
It's a good question. Obviously, the plan identifies the site and it's tightly drawn around the existing building. Officer's view is we're just concerned with, or we're just considering here, the internal alterations to the building. We appreciate there are external works proposed. However, we don't feel that they require listed building consent, hence why we've not considered those in detail as part of this application.
Right. My follow-up question, and if that is the case, then do you agree with me that your condition 2, which does relate to works exterior to the application, outside the application, is not appropriate because it's not within the site of the application, and there are no details of it, and therefore there is an alternative way of dealing with that, just to make it clear that no, any listed building consent is only for works contained within the building, and any external works would require a separate application related to the status of the exterior as a heritage garden.
I entirely agree with that statement. Having looked at that condition again, I think the intentions of the author were clear in the interest of good administration. A certificate B has been signed in this case, identifying that the applicant isn't the owner of the freehold of this property, and clearly there's a desire and intention to carry out works within the curtilage that would require the approval of the site owner in this case. But I agree, a condition framed in the way that you've described would be more appropriate in this case, because the application site is the application site, which is just the buildings.
Okay. Councillor Finesse.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm a bit confused by this because obviously the management company has the final say, so if they don't approve these plans, they won't happen. So what's the point of the planning application? I just don't get it. If we approve it here, if we approve it here, it's going to be stopped by the management company. So why go to the expense of an application? Don't get it. Over to you.
No, we didn't.
Sorry?
We didn't get it either.
Oh, right.
But we're dealing with what we've got.
Yeah, okay.
Chris, I don't know if they want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I think to be fair to the applicant, obviously they realise there's a process to follow, and the first part of the process normally is to receive planning permission. I suppose you could seek permission from the management company first and then apply for planning permission, or you can do the opposite, and they've chosen to do the opposite in this case.
Well, they're obviously against a brick wall, aren't they? Anyway.
Literally. Anyway, Councillor Purdy.
Thanks, Chair. Well, I was going to pick up Councillor O'Brien's point. I think, we're not looking at the Grade 2 listed parkland set in here. We saw a diagram yesterday with a line going away indicating drainage and across. I wasn't clear where that's going to come out, because it seemed to me that it was probably going to affect those steps, and there would be significant damage, I think, and we were told about the subsidence issue. So I think I want to make it clear to the residents, as we've alluded to tonight and indeed yesterday, you have the final say. You are the management committee. Notwithstanding the fact we might have to approve this because we've got no real grounds for refusal, you still have your management decision on that. So it's a kind of juxtaposition, really. One would suspect that the applicant is trying to get planning approval first in the hope that they'll get management decision, rather than, you say, Chris, the other way around. But I am concerned about that drainage aspect and the impact upon the integrity of those steps and that Grade 2 listed building.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Purdy. Got nobody else on my list. Yeah, of course you can, yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Purdy. Condition 3, I think the author, well, the case officer in this particular case has also shared some concerns about the drainage works and the connection and potential impacts on historic fabric. So condition 3 requires a detailed specification, methodology and route for the drainage, so that we can consider any implications on the existing building and historic fabric. So we share those concerns also, and that's why we've asked for a condition to control those details.
Yeah, happy with that, Councillor Purdy? Yeah.
Just one final question. Are there any grounds for refusal on this?
Well, our conservation expert has looked at this application, and he's had regard to the relevant provisions of the Listed Building and Conservation Areas Act and the desirability to preserve the special historic significance and character of the existing building. And he feels, he set out the history of the site pretty well in the report in terms of it's a 1980s element of the building that's subsumed in the listing of the hall. He recognises that the works are to not to historic fabric, but to modern elements of the building and modern partitions. In that respect, the works aren't considered harmful to the listed building to justify refusal.
So in other words, if we did refuse, we'd expect an appeal?
I don't believe there are any grounds for refusal of this application as presented to us.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Purdy. Councillor Bull.
Yeah, thank you. You're saying that the conservation officer has looked into it. There isn't anything that's going to impact on the listed building itself. Well, obviously it will when you come to wanting to put drainage in, because it's not going into existing drainage, it's going to be new. So you are impacting on the outside. And admittedly, as regards what they do inside, and I understand all that, that we haven't got a say of which you decide to be a bedroom, kitchen or anything else. But surely at the end of the day, when you've got to start putting drainage and the likes in, then that is affecting the external. So in that aspect, is there a need, if this goes through, that they've got to come back for another planning application for the exterior, for where they would have to put the drains and the likes?
Just to try and provide some clarity on that, so the drainage within the grounds of the listed building wouldn't necessarily need listed building consent. It's where the drainage connects to the main hall and the listed building. Any works that affect the historic fabric elements that we can control, and that's why we've asked for details of the connection and the methodology for connection of any drainage, to consider the implications of those works on the listed building.
It's got to come out somewhere, so it will affect it, won't it?
I think it's fair to say that there'll be some new drainage connections, but that's why we've asked for a condition to agree those details to ensure no harm to the heritage asset.
Yeah, I think as Councillor O'Brien was saying, I think, and obviously Councillor Finesse, I think we're putting the cart before the horse around this one somehow. But yeah, okay,
Thank you, Sue. Councillor Lees.
Thank you, Chair. If this was to be approved, could we not impose, obviously we've heard from the residents, could we not impose a condition that sound deadening is put on the floors to mitigate some of this sound travel with the rooms being altered around, kitchens over bedrooms, etc.? Could we have a condition on for soundproofing?
We need to be mindful of the tests in relation to conditions. So condition must be necessary for the development to be acceptable in planning terms. The reconfiguration or the use of rooms for different purposes, provided they fall within residential use, wouldn't require any form of planning permission or listed building consent from us. So in that respect, I don't consider a condition along those lines would be reasonably necessary to make the development acceptable in planning terms.
Thank you.
Just before we move on, I need a motion to extend the meeting. So I'll propose an extension of half an hour as the founder's seconder. Thank you, Councillor. All those in favour, please shout. Thank you very much, members. Councillor Finesse.
Thank you, Chair. You say there were no reasons for refusing this, no valid reasons for refusing it. Would it not be a valid reason to say that that we're refusing it because the management company is against it? You know,
I'll get Lee to answer that for you.
No, we are just looking at whether it's a listed building. Then that's a matter of contractual relationship between the management company and those requirements. So we couldn't rely on that. But again, it's a matter of what is within the contracts between the management company and the owners.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, Chris. Councillor O'Brien, and then we'll move into debate.
Yes, just to save time on the debate, I want to go back to this external works. As we've heard, they're not within the boundary of the application, and therefore, my suggestion to you is they're not appropriate to be approved or conditioned at this stage because they're simply not within the boundary of the application. Do you not think that by approving the application, you give, if not a green light, you give an amber light in relation to the external works? You give a sort of approval in principle. Do you not think it would be more appropriate to delete condition 3 altogether, because it's not within the application, but to say put a note on any approval to say that the approval relates purely to those elements within the structure of the building, and any external works, given that this is a registered garden area, would require a separate approval. So that would give no indication at all that we have made a decision on one way or another on the external works. Do you not think that would be a more appropriate formal words to use rather than the condition to something we have absolutely no detail of and which is outside the boundary of the application?
Thank you for the question, Councillor O'Brien. Just to provide some clarity, so the issue here, we're dealing with a listed building consent application, so it's the point of connection and the physical abutment, if you like, of that infrastructure to the listed building. But I do accept your point. I think if members were more comfortable about seeing or understanding what the impacts of those works will be on the listed building, we clearly haven't got the detail here because we're conditioning the detail. And I think if members feel that's an important consideration, then I think it would be legitimate to condition that out of this application and make it clear that those works should be subject of a further grant of of listed building consent where historic fabric is affected by those works.
Okay, happy with that? Right, I'm moving into debate. Members, over to you. Councillor O'Brien.
Well, I would move approval of the recommendation with the deletion of recommendation 3 and its replacement with a note to the effect of the statement that you've given us just now, Chris, related to the approval relating purely to the internal alterations and any works affecting the external character and garden are the subject of a separate application.
Does that find a seconder?
I will support that, Chair, especially because we're always told to deal with the red line of the application, and the red line does not include any of the parkland.
Okay. Anybody else wishing to speak in debate? No? In which case I'll go to the vote. It's been moved and seconded with the deletion of condition 3 and the addition of a footnote relating to further possible planning application or listed building application. So it's been moved for approval. All those in favour, please shout. All those against? Thank you very much. That's been carried unanimously, so approval has been given. And last but not least on my list is item number 5.8. This is the first application of this type we have done at this authority. So it's application number 22/00273. This is a PIP, which is a permission in principle. And we have one speaker on this, Mr. Dominic Cooney, the agent, to speak in favour. You have 5 minutes. I'll let you know when you have 30 seconds left.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Dominic Cooney, a Chartered Town Planner working for Bagshaws, and I'm speaking on behalf of the applicant, Mr. Eric Toon. We understand that this is the first application for permission in principle submitted in the Derbyshire Dales district, and we welcome the recommendation of approval by the planning officer. Permission in principle was brought in by the current government 5 years ago to encourage smaller housing developments and to provide certainty for small house builders. It can be used either for the redevelopment of brownfield sites or for minor applications for housing, which is less than 10 dwellings, in locations where housing development is considered to be acceptable in principle. For example, within defined settlement development boundaries. The application site is within the defined settlement boundary of Brailsford, and as you will have seen on your site visit yesterday, it has an existing access from the highway with good visibility in both directions. The site is completely surrounded by recent housing development at densities of approximately 25 to 30 dwellings per hectare. The application site measures 0.2 hectares, and so its similar densities could easily accommodate 5 to 6 houses. This was the reason for the figure originally stated in the application being only 3 to 5 dwellings to maintain a lower than usual density and to remain in keeping with the surrounding housing. However, it's not simply a matter of dividing down the numbers for smaller sites such as this, because even though typical housing density for larger sites should be aiming for 35 dwellings per hectare, on these smaller sites, the impact of access drives and other constraints has a greater effect on the achievable density. Therefore, we have taken on board the concerns of the planning officer and reduced the amount of development, which, according to the government's guidance, should be expressed as a range, and so it is now proposed as 2 to 3 dwellings. The result of this would be a very low density of 10 to 15 dwellings per hectare, which is less than half that of the surrounding recent developments. The consultation response from Derbyshire Wildlife Trust is noted in relation to great crested newts, especially that the maintained garden is not optimal habitat for newts. But we would direct the committee to the planning officer's report, which clarifies, in accordance with the government's planning practice guidance, that matters such as protected species are assessed at the technical details consent stage, which follows on from the approval of permission in principle. Now that the application has a lower amount of development, this means that the density is low and any mitigation that is required at the technical consent stage for great crested newts can easily be accommodated into the site layout. We also note that there have been no letters of objection to the proposed development. I'm not sure if there have been any late reps, I haven't seen any myself. The site is in a sustainable location, and most importantly, it will be deliverable within a short time frame due to its small size, location, and the nature of the land, meaning that smaller builders can build out this housing in a short time frame. And we have already had expressions of interest in the site from high-quality local house builders. So the matters that fall for consideration at the permission in principle stage are location, land use, and amount of development. The location is within the defined settlement boundary of Brailsford. The land use is currently a residential garden, and the proposed land use is residential, and the amount of development is 2 to 3 dwellings. So we respectfully ask the committee to approve this application today, to accept that permission for up to 3 dwellings is acceptable in principle in this location. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, Chris, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I think the previous speaker has set the scene well there, and has explained the key considerations that we have to look at when assessing applications of this nature. Happy to take questions at this stage.
Members, open to your questions. No? I'll move straight into... Okay, Councillor Purdy.
We picked it up on site, Chris, yesterday, and it's sort of the issue of surrounding local highways authority, and they're asking for a holding position. And I appreciate that, you know,
Can you turn your microphone on, please, Gary?
Thank you. If we agree this in principle, and I see no reason why not to do so, it's like the horse before the cart again, isn't it? You know, we could go and agree this in principle, and then highways can say no. So I don't see what the benefit of these PIPs are. That's just first observation.
Yeah, I think it poses us all sorts of dilemmas, because when you're looking at the appropriateness of sites for development, you want to consider the impacts on protected species, you want to consider the ecological impacts, you want to consider other issues. In terms of the impacts of this development on highway safety, the Highway Authority have expressed a preference for a particular visibility display to be demonstrated, and the applicant has provided that information. Because you've got quite a wide footway and verge before you reach the carriageway edge, you've got quite a significant setback and visibility well in excess of what's required to serve a development which was originally 5 to 6 dwellings. So we're satisfied that an appropriate display can be achieved to satisfy the local highway authority. The issue with the amount of development for us was twofold, really. Although we can't consider the ecological impacts, we were concerned about the impact on settlement pattern. And members will have noted from the site yesterday that there's a close association, because it was former garden land, to the existing dwelling, and we felt that 5 dwellings on that site would have constituted overdevelopment and would have likely resulted in unacceptable overlooking impacts in relation to proximity to the existing dwelling on site. We feel that a development of between 2 and 3 houses could comfortably be accommodated on site, and it will also deliver appropriate mitigation in terms of corridors for newts and us being able to maintain existing boundary treatments. Although we have to set aside the ecological impacts in considering this application, it is just a matter of principle, the amount, land use, and the use of the site.
Chair, I'm prepared to move the recommendations.
Okay, so moved by Councillor Purdy. Councillor Donnelly. It's been proposed, yeah. I mean, if you want to second it, you can second it.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, went on the site visit again yesterday, and the thing that did concern me really was the highways issue, but as I've been told tonight, that is not an issue. So I think it's nothing overbearing about it, and I think really, considering the number of houses there, I think it'll be very, very good development, so I'm happy to second it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Donnelly. Councillor O'Brien.
Thanks, Jack. We do also have an important policy which, if I paraphrase it, relates to the promotion of smaller size units. How do you think that policy would be impacted by allowing, say, a development of two dwellings on here? How would that be dealt with at the next stage?
For a development of this nature, because it's minor and our housing mix policy only triggers in relation to major development, it will come down to an assessment on the character and appearance of the development and its effect on its environment. So if two larger houses were acceptable in terms of the impact on the local environment, then that may result in a favourable recommendation from us in terms of any technical details consent application that may be submitted. But it comes down to impact on character and appearance and the appropriateness of any development that's proposed.
Okay. Councillor Finesse.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just a question, please. I'm sorry to go back to questions, but I've been reading this again. Derbyshire Wildlife Trust are still expressing concern about the newts movement. They currently have free movement between two ponds. When these houses are built, obviously that's going to restrict it. So how will the newts sort of get across this area when all these houses have garden walls?
Yes, it's difficult for us as planners because we want to consider these impacts up front, but the permission in principle route is clear that matters of ecology can't be considered at this stage. You haven't effectively got a planning permission until you've received technical details consent. But what we felt, I mean, the Derbyshire Wildlife Trust were commenting on a scheme of between 5 and 6 dwellings on this site. We feel that the existing boundary vegetation will provide a route for great crested newts, but you've got a new pond. I dealt with the Event Homes development to the west of this site, and you've got a new balancing pond proposed, and there'll clearly be activity or movement from this pond to that pond and ponds to the north of the settlement. Amenity grassland is suboptimal habitat for newts, but they will cross it. But likewise, there's no reason why we couldn't accommodate corridors through the development to provide access across that area, and you'd still maintain the boundary features to provide, again, suitable routes for newts to access the network of ponds in that area. I'm not saying that those issues can be overcome. The matters clearly that we'll have to consider as part of any technical details consent application. But I think with the amount of development that's proposed, it's more likely those issues can be addressed.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Finesse. Got nobody else down for questions, so I'll move into debate. Anybody wanted to speak in debate? No, in which case I'll go to the vote. It's been moved and seconded that permission in principle for... Yes. Yeah, the recommendation is the permission in principle for between 2 and 3 dwelling houses at the site be granted. So all those in favour, please show. All those against? Well, that's been carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Anyway, a little bit of housekeeping to do now. So, moving swiftly on, the last thing to do is to note the appeals progress report. I don't know whether there's anything you want to add about the appeals progress report, Chris?
There are a few good decisions there. It just shows that we are making sound decisions. So it demonstrates that quality of decision making is relatively high with the success rate.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'll move it for noting. Second, all those in favour, please show. And we get to the last bit of business. Whose birthday is it? It's a nice bottle of Louis Latour. It's not your cheap Sainsbury's Blanc. There you go.